If life feels unusually heavy right now, if everything that once felt stable is suddenly shaking, and if you find yourself exhausted not because you are weak, but because you are carrying too much inside, then this moment is not random, and it is not here to punish you. Buddhism teaches that life only applies pressure when something within you is ready to change, when attachments you once relied on have quietly become burdens, and when the path ahead requires you to let go rather than fight harder. The discomfort you feel is not failure, and it is not bad luck. It is a signal that life is testing your grip, your expectations, and your willingness to release what no longer belongs to the person you are becoming. If you can remain still, listen deeply, and stop resisting this moment, you will begin to understand why life is pushing you so hard and what it is gently asking you to let go of. 1. Life pushes you when you are clinging to an old identity. One of the deepest and most misunderstood reasons life begins to feel heavy is not because something is going wrong, but because something inside you has already changed while your mind is still holding on to the past. You may be attached to an old version of yourself, the person you used to be when life felt simpler, when your goals were clearer, or when certain relationships made you feel secure. You may still be holding on to old dreams, old labels, or old expectations about how your life should look by now. Buddhism teaches that the self is not permanent and not fixed, yet the human mind clings tightly to familiarity because it feels safe, even when it no longer brings peace. The mind prefers what is known over what is true, and this is where suffering quietly begins. When your inner awareness starts to grow, the old identity you once lived in begins to feel uncomfortable, like clothing that no longer fits your body. You try to return to old habits, old roles, and old ways of thinking, but they no longer satisfy you. This creates confusion and emotional tension because you are standing between who you were and who you are becoming. Life applies pressure in this moment, not to punish you, but to force a decision. Either you continue pretending to be the old version of yourself, or you allow that version to dissolve so something more aligned can emerge. The pain you feel is not caused by change itself, but by your resistance to releasing what no longer reflects your truth. Buddhism reminds us that growth feels painful only when we cling. Just as a tree must let go of old leaves for new ones to grow, you are being asked to release outdated identities that once protected you, but now limit you. Life becomes heavy when you try to carry an identity that has already expired. The pressure you experience is life's way of helping you drop that weight. The moment you stop forcing yourself to be who you were, the struggle begins to soften. What you are experiencing is not loss, but transition. You are not losing yourself. You are being invited to meet yourself again, more honestly and more freely, without the need to hold on to what you have already outgrown. 2. Life pushes you when you are trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. One of the most exhausting sources of suffering in life comes from the quiet belief that if you try hard enough, plan carefully enough, or worry deeply enough, you can control how everything turns out. Buddhism teaches that this belief is an illusion, yet it is one that the human mind clings to strongly because control feels like safety. When life begins to push you hard, it is often because you are gripping too tightly to outcomes, people, timelines, or expectations that were never truly in your hands. You may want certainty about your future, clarity about relationships, or guarantees that your efforts will be rewarded exactly the way you imagine. When reality refuses to cooperate, frustration builds, and life starts to feel heavy and unfair. The pressure you experience is not life being cruel. It is life revealing a truth you may not want to see yet. No matter how much you plan, life remains unpredictable. People change, situations shift, and paths unfold in ways the mind cannot fully anticipate. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when desire meets resistance, and control is simply desire wearing the mask of responsibility. When you try to force life into a specific shape, you unknowingly create tension within yourself, because reality is always moving while your expectations remain fixed. Life pushes back to loosen your grip, to show you that peace does not come from forcing outcomes, but from flowing with what arises. Often, the harder you try to control something, the more unstable you feel inside. You may replay conversations in your mind, worry about what might happen, or feel anxious when things do not go according to plan. This constant mental effort drains your energy and disconnects you from the present moment. Buddhism reminds us that true effort is not about controlling results, but about acting with awareness and then letting go. When life pushes you, it is inviting you to release the exhausting habit of micromanaging existence and to trust the natural unfolding of events. Letting go of control does not mean becoming careless or passive. It means understanding the difference between intention and attachment. You can still work hard, care deeply, and make wise choices, but without demanding that life obey your expectations. The moment you loosen your grip, the inner tension begins to ease. Life no longer feels like an enemy because you are no longer fighting it. What once felt like pressure slowly transforms into guidance. Life stops pushing so hard when you stop resisting its flow, and in that surrender, you often discover a deeper sense of calm, resilience, and quiet confidence that no amount of control could ever provide. 3. Life pushes you when you are seeking your worth and peace outside yourself. One of the most painful yet quiet reasons life begins to push you is because your sense of worth, safety, or peace has slowly become dependent on things outside of you. You may not even realize it at first. It can show up as wanting others to understand you, needing people to appreciate your efforts, hoping someone will stay consistent, or believing that your happiness will arrive once certain people, situations, or achievements finally align. Buddhism teaches that anything outside the self is impermanent, and when your emotional stability is tied to impermanent things, suffering naturally follows. Life pushes you in these moments to expose this dependency, not to shame you, but to free you from it. When people change, distance themselves, or fail to meet your expectations, the pain you feel often comes from the meaning your mind attaches to their behavior. You may interpret their actions as rejection, unworthiness, or proof that you are not enough. Buddhism reminds us that this interpretation is created by the mind, not by reality itself. Life pushes you by removing external validation, so you can see how fragile peace becomes when it depends on something you cannot control. This pressure is not meant to isolate you, but to redirect you inward, toward a source of stability that does not disappear when circumstances change. Loneliness is often misunderstood as something negative, but in Buddhist wisdom, solitude can be a powerful teacher. When life creates emotional distance from others, it is often giving you space to meet yourself without distraction. In the absence of constant reassurance, praise, or connection, you begin to notice your inner dialogue, your fears, and your unmet needs more clearly. This awareness can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is necessary for growth. Life pushes you into silence so you can hear the parts of yourself that were always there but never fully acknowledged. As you begin to release the habit of seeking worth outside yourself, something subtle but powerful shifts within you. You stop chasing approval and start cultivating self-respect. You stop measuring your value through other people's reactions and begin to anchor it in awareness, compassion, and presence. Buddhism teaches that true peace arises when you no longer depend on external conditions to feel whole. Life pushes you until you learn this lesson, because once you find peace within yourself, no one can take it away. The pressure softens when you no longer need life to prove your worth, and what remains is a quiet strength that grows naturally from self-understanding rather than external validation. 4. Life pushes you to teach you the truth of impermanence. One of the most difficult truths the human mind struggles to accept is that everything in life is temporary, and much of the pain you experience comes from forgetting or resisting this reality. Buddhism places impermanence at the very center of its teachings because misunderstanding it is one of the main causes of suffering. Life pushes you hardest when you expect permanence from things that were never meant to last, whether it is relationships, emotions, success, stability, youth, or even certain versions of happiness. When life changes suddenly or takes something away, the pain often feels unbearable, not because the loss itself is unbearable, but because the mind believed that what was lost should have stayed. From a Buddhist perspective, nothing arises without conditions and nothing remains unchanged. Every experience, whether pleasant or painful, is born, changes, and eventually fades. When you forget this truth, you unconsciously begin to build your peace on fragile ground. You expect people to remain the same, situations to stay stable, and feelings to last forever. When reality moves, as it always does, the mind reacts with fear, grief, anger, or confusion. Life pushes you in these moments to remind you of a truth you may not want to face yet. Clinging to what is temporary creates suffering, while understanding impermanence creates freedom. Often, life introduces impermanence through experiences you did not choose. A relationship changes, a connection weakens, a role ends, or a phase of life quietly dissolves. The mind immediately asks why this is happening and what went wrong. But Buddhism encourages a different question. Instead of asking why something ended, it asks why you believed it was meant to stay unchanged. Life pushes you so you can see that pain is not caused by endings, but by the demand that things should not end. When you stop arguing with impermanence, the sharp edge of suffering begins to soften. Impermanence is not meant to make life feel meaningless. In fact, it gives life depth and value. When you understand that everything changes, you begin to appreciate moments more fully without trying to trap them. You learn to love without clinging, enjoy without possessing, and experience without demanding permanence. Life pushes you when you forget this balance and start building emotional security on things that cannot provide it. The discomfort you feel is a teacher guiding you back to awareness. As you gradually accept impermanence, something profound happens within you. You stop taking change personally. You stop seeing every ending as failure or rejection. You begin to see life as a flowing process rather than a fixed structure that must remain intact. Buddhism teaches that peace comes not from holding on, but from allowing. When you allow things to arise and pass without resistance, life no longer feels like an enemy that keeps taking things away. Instead, it becomes a teacher showing you how to remain steady even as everything moves. Life pushes you to teach impermanence because once you truly understand it, fear loses much of its power over you. You no longer live in constant anxiety about loss, change, or uncertainty. You become flexible, resilient, and deeply present. The pressure that once felt overwhelming slowly transforms into wisdom. You realize that nothing was taken from you unfairly, because nothing was ever owned in the first place. Everything was borrowed for a time, including people, experiences, and even versions of yourself. When this understanding settles in your heart, life stops pushing so hard because you are no longer resisting its natural rhythm. What remains is acceptance, clarity, and a quiet peace that flows with change instead of fighting it. 5. Life pushes you to free you from emotional dependence and attachment to others. One of the most subtle yet powerful reasons life begins to push you is because your emotional peace has slowly become dependent on other people. This dependence does not always look dramatic or obvious. It often hides beneath care, loyalty, love, or the hope that someone will always remain consistent. Buddhism teaches that when your happiness depends on another person's behavior, presence, or validation, you are placing your inner stability on something that is constantly changing. Life pushes you in these moments not to isolate you, but to help you discover a deeper, more stable source of peace within yourself. Emotional dependence creates suffering because it ties your sense of safety to forces you cannot control. When someone changes, becomes distant, misunderstands you, or fails to meet your expectations, the pain you feel is often intense and confusing. You may feel abandoned, unimportant, or unseen. Buddhism reminds us that this pain does not mean you loved too much or cared wrongly. It means you were attaching your peace to something outside yourself. Life pushes you by creating emotional distance so you can see how fragile peace becomes when it depends on another person's actions. Attachment often disguises itself as love, but Buddhist wisdom draws a clear distinction between the two. Love allows freedom, while attachment demands consistency. Love flows, while attachment clings. When life disrupts attachments, it can feel cruel at first, but this disruption is often an act of compassion. Life is teaching you how to love without losing yourself, how to care without collapsing when someone changes, and how to remain emotionally steady even when relationships shift. This lesson is not about becoming cold or distant, but about becoming whole. As life pushes you through emotional challenges, you may experience periods of loneliness or emotional silence. These moments are deeply uncomfortable because they strip away familiar sources of reassurance. Yet Buddhism views these moments as necessary for inner maturity. In the absence of external comfort, you are invited to sit with your own emotions, fears, and needs without distraction. This is where self-awareness grows. You begin to understand yourself more clearly, and in that understanding, you discover that you are capable of holding your own emotions without depending on someone else to carry them for you. When emotional dependence begins to dissolve, a quiet transformation takes place. You stop chasing people for closure, attention, or validation. You stop interpreting distance as rejection and change as betrayal. Instead, you begin to see relationships as shared journeys rather than emotional lifelines. Buddhism teaches that when you are emotionally independent, you can love more freely and deeply because your peace no longer depends on outcomes you cannot control. Life pushes you until you learn this truth, because once you are emotionally grounded within yourself, relationships become sources of connection rather than sources of suffering. The pressure life applies in these moments is not meant to harden your heart, but to strengthen it. When you learn to stand emotionally on your own awareness, you become more resilient, compassionate, and present. Life stops pushing so hard when you stop clinging to others for stability. What remains is a calm confidence, an inner balance, and a deeper capacity for love that does not bind you in fear of loss. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward, and this is why life pushes you through emotional dependence until you are ready to let go. 6. Life pushes you to awaken you from unconscious living and deep mental conditioning. One of the most important reasons life begins to push you so intensely is because you have been living on autopilot, guided more by habit, conditioning, and unconscious reactions than by true awareness. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering exists not because life is inherently painful, but because the mind operates without mindfulness, repeating the same emotional patterns, beliefs, and reactions without ever questioning them. When life pushes you, it is often because your awareness is ready to expand, and expansion always disrupts comfort. Unconscious living means reacting instead of responding, repeating instead of choosing, and following familiar patterns simply because they feel normal, even when they no longer serve you. You may find yourself stuck in the same emotional cycles, attracting similar experiences or responding to challenges in ways that leave you drained and confused. Buddhism teaches that these patterns are not personal failures, but habits of the conditioned mind. Life pushes you when it needs to interrupt this conditioning, because awareness cannot grow in comfort alone. When life applies pressure, it slows you down or forces you to stop long enough to observe yourself. Plans fall apart, routines break, and familiar distractions lose their grip. This can feel unsettling because the mind prefers predictability even when it leads to suffering. Life pushes you into discomfort so you can see your thoughts, fears, and attachments clearly instead of running from them. In Buddhist practice, this moment of disruption is seen as a doorway to insight rather than a setback. Pain and difficulty serve a specific purpose in awakening awareness. They bring attention to areas of your life where you have been acting mechanically rather than consciously. When something hurts, you are forced to look at it. When something collapses, you are forced to question it. Buddhism teaches that awareness arises naturally when the mind can no longer escape into routine. Life pushes you because it wants you to wake up from patterns that have been silently controlling your choices. As awareness deepens, you begin to notice how much of your suffering is created by the mind's interpretations rather than by events themselves. You start observing your thoughts instead of believing them automatically. You see how fear, expectation, and attachment shape your emotional responses. This observation is the beginning of freedom. Life pushes you until you are willing to look inward honestly, without blaming others or circumstances for your inner state. This awakening process is rarely comfortable because it challenges long-held beliefs about who you are and how life works. You may feel lost, uncertain, or emotionally raw as old illusions fall away. Buddhism teaches that this confusion is not a sign that something is wrong, but that something false is dissolving. Life pushes you to break identification with limiting stories you have been telling yourself, stories about failure, inadequacy, or control that once felt real but were never true. As unconscious patterns loosen, you gain the ability to choose how you respond rather than reacting automatically. You become more present, more patient, and more compassionate with yourself and others. You realize that peace does not come from changing life, but from changing how you relate to it. Life pushes you to awaken because once you are aware, you are no longer controlled by circumstances or emotions. You move through life with greater clarity and balance. The pressure life applies during this stage is intense because awakening requires the dismantling of familiar structures of thought. The mind resists this process because it feels like loss of control. Yet Buddhism teaches that what you lose in illusion, you gain in freedom. Life pushes you until awareness becomes stronger than fear, until mindfulness replaces habit, and until you begin living consciously rather than unconsciously. When this awakening settles, life gradually becomes less heavy. Challenges still arise, but they no longer dominate your inner world. You meet difficulty with understanding rather than panic, and change with curiosity rather than resistance. Life stops pushing so hard because you are no longer asleep to its lessons. You are awake, present, and able to walk with life instead of being dragged by it. This is why life pushes you through unconscious living, not to punish you, but to invite you into a deeper, more aware way of being. 7. Life pushes you hardest right before a deep inner transformation takes place. One of the most important truths taught in Buddhism is that profound inner change rarely arrives gently. Transformation is not comfortable, and awakening is not soft. When life pushes you harder than ever before, it is often because something deep within you is ready to change, even if your conscious mind is still resisting. Many people misinterpret this stage as failure, punishment, or bad luck, but Buddhist wisdom sees it as a sign of approaching clarity. The greatest pressure often comes right before the old self dissolves and a more aware version of you begins to emerge. At this stage, life may feel unusually intense. You may experience confusion about your direction, emotional exhaustion without a clear reason, or a sense that nothing familiar brings comfort anymore. What once motivated you may now feel empty. What once felt stable may now feel fragile. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort arises because the mind is losing attachment to old structures that once defined your sense of identity. When these structures weaken, the mind panics because it no longer knows who it is holding on to. Life pushes you here to complete the process of letting go. Transformation requires the breaking down of illusions. Illusions about control, permanence, identity, and external fulfillment must fall apart before deeper wisdom can arise. This collapse feels painful because the mind has built its sense of safety around these illusions. Life applies pressure to dissolve them completely, not halfway, because partial awakening only creates more confusion. Buddhism teaches that clarity comes when attachment is fully seen and released, not when it is temporarily suppressed. During this stage, you may feel isolated even when surrounded by people. Conversations may feel shallow, old relationships may feel misaligned. You may crave silence, space, and solitude without fully understanding why. This is not withdrawal from life, but a natural turning inward. Life pushes you away from distractions so you can listen to what is changing inside you. When external noise fades, inner truth becomes audible. The mind often resists this phase because it feels like losing everything at once. Old beliefs no longer make sense, but new understanding has not fully formed yet. Buddhism describes this as a transitional state where the old has ended but the new has not yet arrived. This in-between space is uncomfortable because certainty disappears. Life pushes you to remain present in this uncertainty without rushing to replace it with familiar patterns. True transformation cannot be forced or hurried. It must unfold naturally through awareness and patience. As the pressure continues, you begin to notice subtle shifts within yourself. You react less impulsively. You observe your emotions instead of being consumed by them. You begin to see how much of your suffering was created by attachment rather than circumstance. Buddhism teaches that insight arises gradually, not suddenly, and often quietly. The transformation taking place is internal, invisible to others, and deeply personal. Life pushes you not to create a dramatic external change, but to cultivate a stable inner foundation. At this stage, letting go becomes less about effort and more about understanding. You stop fighting reality because you see that resistance only prolongs pain. You stop chasing answers because clarity begins to emerge on its own. You realize that much of what you were trying to hold on to was never meant to stay. Life pushes you until acceptance becomes easier than resistance, and surrender becomes a form of strength rather than weakness. This transformation also reshapes how you relate to suffering. Instead of seeing pain as something to escape, you begin to see it as information. Pain points to attachment. Discomfort reveals resistance. Difficulty highlights where awareness is needed. Buddhism teaches that suffering is a teacher, and life pushes you until you are ready to learn from it rather than run from it. Once this shift occurs, suffering loses its power to overwhelm you. As the old self dissolves, a quieter and more grounded presence begins to take its place. You become less reactive, less dependent on external conditions, and less afraid of change. Life still presents challenges, but they no longer feel personal or threatening. You understand that change is not happening to you, but through you. This understanding brings a sense of peace that does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. Life pushes you hardest before transformation, because transformation requires total honesty. You are asked to face your fears, attachments, and illusions without turning away. Buddhism teaches that liberation comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from meeting it with awareness. When you stop resisting this process, the pressure begins to ease. What once felt overwhelming slowly becomes manageable, and what once felt chaotic begins to feel purposeful. Eventually, you realize that this difficult phase was not meant to last forever. It was a passage, not a destination. Life pushed you to strip away what was false, so that what remains is real, stable, and aligned. You emerge with a deeper understanding of yourself and a quieter confidence that does not seek approval or certainty. This is the transformation Buddhism points toward, and this is why life pushes you so hard before it lets you move forward with clarity and calm. 8. Life pushes you until you learn how to let go without fear and trust the flow of existence. One of the final and most difficult lessons life teaches through pressure is learning how to let go without fear, panic, or desperation. Many people believe they have let go, but in reality they are still holding on mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Buddhism teaches that true letting go is not an action of the hands, but a release in the heart and mind. Life continues to push you when you are pretending to let go while secretly hoping things will return to how they were, or while waiting for certainty before you release your grip. The pressure remains because the lesson is incomplete. Fear is the greatest obstacle to letting go. Fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, and fear of not being enough without what you are holding on to. The mind clings because it believes attachment equals survival. Buddhism gently dismantles this belief by showing that clinging actually creates suffering, while letting go creates space for peace. Life pushes you repeatedly until you are willing to face this fear honestly, instead of running from it or disguising it as logic, caution, or loyalty. When you resist letting go, life begins to remove things forcefully. Situations collapse, relationships end, plans fall apart, and certainty disappears. This can feel harsh, but from a Buddhist perspective, it is compassionate. Life removes what you cannot release on your own, because holding on would keep you trapped in suffering. The push becomes stronger when gentle lessons are ignored. This is not because life is cruel, but because awareness is trying to emerge, and awareness cannot grow in a mind that refuses to loosen its grip. Letting go does not mean that what you release had no value. Many people struggle because they believe that letting go means admitting something was meaningless or wrong. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Things can be meaningful and still temporary. Experiences can be beautiful and still end. Letting go honors impermanence rather than denying it. Life pushes you to understand that gratitude and release can exist together, and that you do not have to cling to something forever to appreciate what it gave you. As you begin to let go more deeply, you may feel a sense of emptiness or uncertainty. The mind is used to filling space with expectations, attachments, and identities. When these dissolve, the emptiness feels uncomfortable at first. Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is not lack, but openness. It is the space where new understanding, peace, and wisdom can arise. Life pushes you into this space so you can learn to sit with uncertainty without rushing to escape it. Trust becomes essential at this stage. Trust not in outcomes, but in the process of life itself. Buddhism does not ask blind faith, but mindful observation. When you look back honestly, you may notice that many of the things you once feared losing were eventually replaced by growth, clarity, or strength you did not have before. Life pushes you to see this pattern so you can begin to trust that letting go does not lead to emptiness, but to transformation. As fear loosens its hold, your relationship with life begins to change. You stop demanding guarantees before moving forward. You stop needing to know how everything will turn out before taking the next step. You begin to meet life as it is, rather than as you want it to be. Buddhism teaches that peace arises naturally when resistance ends. Life pushes you until resistance gives way to acceptance, and acceptance opens the door to calm awareness. This stage of letting go also transforms how you relate to pain. Instead of seeing pain as something to avoid, you begin to see it as something that passes. You observe discomfort without becoming it. You allow emotions to arise and fall without clinging to them. Life pushes you until you learn that nothing you experience defines you permanently. Thoughts come and go, feelings rise and fade, situations change. When this understanding settles, fear loses its authority over your mind. Eventually, you reach a point where life no longer needs to push as hard. You become lighter, not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer carrying unnecessary weight. You trust movement instead of fighting it. You release attachment instead of feeding it. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not found in controlling life, but in flowing with it consciously. When you finally let go without fear, life responds with ease. This is the quiet wisdom behind pressure. Life pushes you not to exhaust you, but to empty you of what you no longer need. Once you are empty of fear, attachment, and resistance, you are free to move forward with clarity and peace. What remains is not loss, but presence, not confusion, but understanding. Not struggle, but a deep sense of alignment with the natural rhythm of existence. This is the final release life waits for, and once it arrives, the pushing stops, because the lesson has been learned. 9. Life pushes you until you learn how to stand alone without feeling empty or afraid. One of the final and most challenging lessons life teaches through pressure is learning how to stand alone without feeling abandoned, incomplete, or afraid. Many people associate being alone with failure, loss, or weakness, but Buddhism teaches something very different. Solitude is not a punishment. It is a stage of inner maturation. Life pushes you into moments of aloneness not to isolate you, but to help you discover who you are when nothing external is supporting your identity. As long as your sense of self depends on roles, relationships, or constant stimulation, true inner stability cannot develop. When life removes people, distractions, or familiar routines, the first emotion that often arises is fear. The mind interprets aloneness as danger because it has been conditioned to seek safety through connection, approval, and activity. Buddhism teaches that this fear is not caused by being alone, but by the belief that you cannot be whole without something or someone outside yourself. Life pushes you into solitude so this belief can surface clearly and be examined with awareness rather than avoided through distraction. Standing alone does not mean rejecting love or connection. It means no longer needing them to feel complete. When you rely on others to define your worth, direction, or emotional balance, you live in a fragile state because those conditions are always changing. Life pushes you by creating emotional distance so you can experience what remains when external support fades. At first, this can feel like emptiness, but Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is not absence, it is space. It is the space where self-awareness, clarity, and inner strength begin to grow. In solitude, the mind becomes louder before it becomes quieter. Old fears, regrets, and insecurities rise to the surface because there is nothing left to drown them out. Life pushes you to face these inner movements honestly rather than running from them. This confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Buddhism teaches that what you are willing to observe without judgment loses its power over you. When you sit with yourself long enough, fear begins to soften and understanding takes its place. As you learn to stand alone, you begin to see how much of your suffering was tied to expectations placed on others. You expected people to stay, to understand, to protect, or to fulfill needs they were never meant to carry. Life pushes you into independence, so these expectations can dissolve. This does not make you cold or detached. It makes you free. When you no longer need others to complete you, relationships become choices rather than necessities, and love becomes lighter rather than burdensome. Buddhism teaches that true refuge is found within awareness, not within people or circumstances. When life pushes you into aloneness, it is guiding you toward this refuge. You begin to rely on mindfulness, presence, and self-understanding rather than constant reassurance. This inner grounding creates a stability that cannot be shaken by loss, rejection, or change. Life pushes you until you learn that being alone does not mean being unsupported. It means being supported by something deeper and more reliable than external conditions. As solitude becomes more familiar, a quiet confidence begins to form. You no longer panic at silence. You no longer rush to fill emptiness with noise, people, or activity. You learn how to sit with yourself without needing to escape. Buddhism teaches that this comfort with oneself is a sign of inner maturity. Life pushes you until you reach this stage, because only then can you engage with the world from a place of wholeness rather than need. Standing alone also changes how you respond to life's challenges. When difficulties arise, you no longer feel immediately overwhelmed or helpless. You trust your ability to meet experience as it comes. You stop searching for someone to rescue you emotionally and start responding with awareness and patience. Life pushes you to develop this inner resilience because it is essential for lasting peace. Eventually you realize that the fear you once associated with being alone was not fear of solitude, but fear of meeting yourself without distraction. Once you meet yourself honestly, that fear dissolves. What remains is clarity, steadiness, and a sense of quiet companionship with your own awareness. Buddhism teaches that when you can stand alone without feeling empty, you are no longer controlled by attachment or fear of loss. Life stops pushing so hard when you reach this understanding. You move through the world connected but not dependent, loving but not clinging, open but not fragile. You realize that solitude was never meant to break you. It was meant to reveal the strength that was always within you. This is why life pushes you into standing alone, because once you learn how to do so peacefully, nothing can shake your inner balance again. 10. Life pushes you until you learn to live without needing life to be easy. One of the most advanced and liberating lessons life teaches through pressure is learning how to live without needing life to be comfortable, predictable, or easy in order to feel at peace. Many people unknowingly believe that peace will arrive only after problems disappear, circumstances improve, or life finally becomes gentle. Buddhism teaches that this belief itself is a source of suffering, because life by its nature is unstable, changing, and often challenging. Life pushes you repeatedly until you understand that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to remain centered within it. When you expect life to be easy, every challenge feels personal, every obstacle feels unfair, every delay feels like failure. The mind begins to resist reality, and this resistance turns ordinary difficulty into emotional suffering. Buddhism teaches that pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional, created by the demand that life should be different from what it is. Life pushes you so you can see this pattern clearly. It applies pressure until you recognize that clinging to comfort, certainty, and ease only makes hardship feel heavier. As life becomes more demanding, You may notice frustration arising not only from events themselves, but from the belief that you should not be facing them at all. This belief quietly drains your energy and clouds your judgment. Life pushes you to release the expectation that peace requires favorable conditions. When you stop needing life to cooperate with your preferences, you gain a deeper kind of freedom. You begin to meet challenges as part of the human experience rather than as signs that something has gone wrong. Buddhism teaches that equanimity is the ability to remain balanced regardless of pleasure or pain. Life pushes you until you develop this balance, because without it, your emotional state is constantly at the mercy of circumstances. When things go well, you feel uplifted. When they go poorly, you feel defeated. This constant emotional swinging creates exhaustion. Life pushes you to find a steadier ground within yourself, one that does not rise and fall with every external change. Learning to live without needing life to be easy does not mean becoming indifferent or numb. It means becoming resilient and realistic. You still feel emotions, but they no longer control you. You still face challenges, but they no longer define your worth or direction. Buddhism teaches that when you accept difficulty as part of existence rather than as an interruption to it, the mind becomes calmer and clearer. Life pushes you until you stop arguing with reality and start working with it. As this understanding deepens, you begin to respond differently to hardship. Instead of asking why this is happening to you, you ask how to meet it with awareness. Instead of collapsing under pressure, you remain present with it. This shift changes everything. Life still presents difficulties, but they no longer feel overwhelming. You stop waiting for a perfect future to begin living fully in the present moment. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place peace can exist, regardless of circumstances. Life pushes you to teach you inner self-reliance. When you no longer depend on life being easy, you develop confidence in your ability to handle whatever arises. You trust your awareness, patience, and adaptability. This trust reduces fear of the future because you know that even if things become difficult, you will not be lost. Life pushes you until this trust replaces anxiety. Eventually, you realize that much of your suffering came not from life's challenges, but from your resistance to them. Once resistance fades, pressure loses its intensity. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once felt unfair becomes understandable. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is not surrender to defeat, but alignment with truth. When you accept that life includes difficulty, impermanence, and uncertainty, you stop fighting what cannot be changed and start cultivating peace where you are. Living without needing life to be easy also transforms your sense of gratitude. You stop being grateful only when things go well and begin to appreciate resilience, awareness, and growth even during hardship. You recognize that difficulty has shaped your wisdom, patience, and compassion. Life pushes you until you see that ease was never the greatest teacher, challenge was. As this lesson settles fully, you move through life with quiet strength. You do not chase happiness frantically or fear discomfort excessively. You understand that peace is an inner stance, not an external condition. Buddhism teaches that when the mind stops demanding ease, it becomes spacious and free. Life stops pushing so hard because there is no longer resistance to overcome. In the end, life pushes you to teach you how to live honestly, realistically, and fully, not waiting for comfort, not depending on certainty, not fearing difficulty. When you reach this understanding, life no longer feels like an opponent. It becomes a companion on the path of awareness. You walk forward not because life is easy, but because you are steady. This is the quiet mastery life was guiding you toward all along, and this is why the pushing was necessary until the lesson was learned. 11. Life pushes you until you stop running from pain and learn to sit with it in awareness. One of the final and most transformative lessons life teaches through pressure is learning how to stop running from pain and instead sit with it in calm awareness. Most human suffering is not caused by pain itself, but by the constant effort to escape it, suppress it, distract from it, or deny its presence. Buddhism teaches that pain is an inevitable part of existence, but resistance to pain multiplies suffering. Life pushes you when you have been avoiding uncomfortable emotions, unresolved grief, fear, or inner wounds, because healing cannot happen in avoidance. From early life, the mind learns to label pain as something dangerous that must be eliminated as quickly as possible. When sadness arises, you distract yourself. When fear appears, you try to control outcomes. When loss occurs, you rush to replace what was taken. Buddhism teaches that this habit keeps pain alive beneath the surface, where it quietly shapes your thoughts, reactions, and behavior. Life pushes you by removing distractions and forcing stillness, so you can no longer run from what needs to be felt and understood. When life slows you down or isolates you emotionally, buried emotions begin to surface. Old memories, regrets, disappointments, and unexpressed grief may rise unexpectedly. This can feel overwhelming at first, because the mind has spent years avoiding these experiences. Buddhism teaches that this surfacing is not a setback, but a release. Pain that is brought into awareness begins to soften. Pain that is ignored continues to control you unconsciously. Life pushes you until you are ready to meet your pain without judgment. Sitting with pain does not mean drowning in it or identifying yourself as broken. It means observing pain as a passing experience rather than a permanent identity. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as the practice of watching sensations, emotions, and thoughts arise and pass without clinging or aversion. When you sit with pain in this way, you begin to notice that it changes. It has intensity, texture, and movement. It is not fixed. Life pushes you to discover this truth directly, because once you see pain as impermanent, fear loses much of its power over you. As you remain present with discomfort, a deeper understanding emerges. You begin to see how pain is often layered with stories created by the mind. The event itself may be painful, but the belief that it should not have happened, that it defines you, or that it will last forever, adds unnecessary suffering. Buddhism teaches that awareness separates direct experience from mental interpretation. Life pushes you to develop this separation so you can experience pain without being consumed by it. This process requires patience and compassion toward yourself. The mind may resist sitting with pain, trying to escape into distraction or self-judgment. Buddhism teaches gentle persistence rather than force. Life pushes you gradually, allowing you to build the strength to remain present without collapsing or numbing yourself. Each moment you stay with discomfort without reacting weakens old patterns of avoidance and strengthens awareness. As this practice deepens, pain begins to transform. It no longer feels like an enemy attacking you, but like a messenger carrying information. Pain reveals where attachment exists, where expectations remain, and where healing is needed. Buddhism teaches that suffering becomes wisdom when it is understood rather than resisted. Life pushes you until you learn to listen to pain instead of fighting it. Learning to sit with pain also changes how you relate to others. When you stop running from your own discomfort, you become more compassionate toward the suffering of others. You no longer judge pain as weakness because you understand its universality. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises naturally from awareness. Life pushes you through your own pain so you can meet the world with greater softness and understanding. Over time, you notice that pain loses its ability to overwhelm you. It still arises, but it no longer defines your emotional state. You develop trust in your capacity to feel deeply without being destroyed by what you feel. Buddhism teaches that this trust is a foundation of inner freedom. Life pushes you until you stop fearing pain and start trusting awareness. Eventually, you realize that much of what you feared was not pain itself, but the belief that you could not survive it. Once this belief dissolves, a quiet strength remains. You understand that pain comes and goes, but awareness remains. Life stops pushing so hard when you learn this lesson, because there is no longer resistance to overcome. You are no longer running. You are present. This is one of the deepest forms of liberation Buddhism offers. When you can sit with pain without fear, avoidance, or self-judgment, nothing has the power to destabilize your inner world completely. Life pushed you here not to make you suffer, but to show you that you are capable of meeting life fully, honestly, and courageously. This is the strength that remains when all escape routes close, and this is the wisdom that only pressure can reveal. 12. Life pushes you until you realize that nothing outside you was ever meant to save you. One of the deepest and most liberating lessons life teaches through pressure is the realization that nothing outside of you was ever meant to save you, complete you, or permanently fix what feels broken inside. Many people move through life unconsciously waiting for something to arrive that will finally make everything feel right. This may take the form of a relationship, success, recognition, financial stability, healing from another person, or a future version of life where everything feels easier. Buddhism teaches that this waiting itself is a form of suffering because it places your peace in a future moment that may never arrive. Life pushes you until this illusion gently but firmly collapses. From a young age, the mind learns to search outward for relief. When pain arises, you look for distraction. When emptiness appears, you look for connection. When fear surfaces, you look for certainty. Buddhism teaches that this outward searching never ends because external conditions are unstable by nature. No matter what you gain, something else will eventually be lost. No matter who enters your life, change will follow. Life pushes you by removing external supports, so you can see clearly that relying on them for salvation only deepens suffering. This realization can feel frightening at first. When life takes away what you hoped would save you, it may feel like abandonment or betrayal. The mind asks why things are being taken when they were needed most. Buddhism offers a compassionate answer. Nothing was taken to harm you. What was removed was never meant to carry the weight you placed upon it. Life pushes you to stop outsourcing your inner peace to people, achievements, or circumstances that were never designed to provide it. As this lesson deepens, you begin to notice how often you have postponed living fully while waiting for something to change. You may have told yourself that peace will come once you are healed, once life settles down, once someone understands you, or once you reach a certain point. Buddhism teaches that peace does not arrive as a reward for perfect conditions. It is available only in the present moment, through awareness. Life pushes you until you stop delaying your presence and start meeting life as it is. This lesson does not mean rejecting help, love, or support from others. Buddhism does not promote isolation or self-denial. It teaches non-attachment. You can accept support without depending on it for your sense of worth or stability. Life pushes you to understand this distinction. When support disappears, you learn that something within you remains untouched. That something is awareness. It does not leave. It does not abandon you. It does not depend on circumstances. Life pushes you until you recognize this inner refuge. As reliance on external salvation fades, a subtle but powerful shift occurs. You stop asking life to rescue you and begin taking responsibility for how you relate to experience. You stop blaming circumstances for your inner state and start observing how the mind creates suffering through expectation and resistance. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes not from controlling life, but from understanding the mind. Life pushes you until this understanding becomes unavoidable. You may notice that once you stop expecting life to save you, disappointment loses much of its grip. When things go wrong, you no longer collapse emotionally because you were not depending on those things to hold you together. When things go right, you enjoy them without fear of losing them. This balance is at the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Life pushes you until you learn how to experience life fully without clinging to it for security. This lesson also transforms how you relate to the future. You stop living in constant anticipation, waiting for a moment when everything will finally feel complete. Buddhism teaches that completeness is not achieved, but recognized. Life pushes you until you stop chasing fulfillment and start noticing the quiet presence that has always been there beneath striving and fear. This presence does not need to be saved, fixed, or improved. It only needs to be acknowledged. As this understanding settles, the pressure life applies begins to ease. You no longer feel like something is missing, even when circumstances are imperfect. You no longer feel abandoned when external supports fall away. You trust your ability to meet life moment by moment with awareness and compassion. Buddhism teaches that this trust is the foundation of liberation. Life pushes you until you stand firmly in this truth. In the end, life was never trying to push you toward something outside yourself. It was guiding you inward toward the recognition that peace was never missing. It was simply overlooked. When you stop expecting life to save you, life stops pushing so hard. What remains is quiet confidence, inner steadiness, and a deep sense of alignment with the present moment. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward, and this is the final understanding life was patiently leading you toward through every moment of pressure and challenge. 13. Life pushes you until you learn to trust silence, stillness, and the wisdom of not knowing. One of the most subtle and advanced lessons life teaches through pressure is learning to trust silence, stillness, and the wisdom of not knowing. The human mind is constantly searching for answers, explanations, reassurance, and direction. When life becomes difficult, the urge to understand everything immediately grows stronger. You want clarity, certainty, and proof that things will turn out well. Buddhism teaches that this constant need to know is itself a source of suffering because life does not unfold according to mental timelines or expectations. Life pushes you until you realize that not knowing is not a weakness, but a deep form of wisdom. When answers do not arrive, the mind becomes restless. It searches endlessly for meaning, replaying the past and imagining the future. This mental noise creates exhaustion and confusion, making life feel heavier than it needs to be. Buddhism teaches that clarity does not come from forceful thinking, but from stillness. Life pushes you by withholding answers so you can experience the difference between mental activity and true understanding. When the mind becomes quiet, insight arises naturally, without effort. Silence often feels uncomfortable because it removes distractions. In silence, there is nothing to hide behind. Thoughts, fears, and uncertainty become more noticeable. Life pushes you into silence when constant activity and noise have been keeping you disconnected from your inner experience. This is not meant to punish you, it is meant to reconnect you with awareness. Buddhism teaches that silence is not empty, it is full of presence. When you stop filling every moment with explanation and analysis, you begin to sense a deeper intelligence guiding life beneath the surface. Stillness is often misunderstood as stagnation or lack of progress. In reality, stillness is where integration happens. When life pushes you to slow down, pause, or remain in uncertainty, it is giving you time to absorb lessons that cannot be rushed. Buddhism teaches that wisdom ripens quietly, much like fruit on a tree. Pulling too early only creates bitterness. Life pushes you until you stop forcing movement and allow understanding to mature on its own. The fear of not knowing is deeply rooted in the mind's desire for control. When you do not know what comes next, the mind imagines danger. Buddhism teaches that this fear arises because the mind confuses uncertainty with threat. Life pushes you into uncertainty so you can learn to remain present without needing guarantees. This presence dissolves fear because fear lives in imagined futures, not in the present moment. When you stay with what is happening now, uncertainty loses its sharpness. As you learn to trust silence and stillness, your relationship with life begins to change. You stop demanding immediate answers and start listening more deeply. You notice subtle signs, inner shifts, and intuitive understanding that were previously drowned out by mental noise. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not always spoken loudly. Often it appears as a quiet knowing, a sense of rightness that does not need explanation. Life pushes you until you learn to recognize and trust this quiet guidance. This lesson also teaches humility. The mind wants to believe it can understand everything if it tries hard enough. Buddhism gently challenges this belief by reminding us that life is vast, interconnected, and beyond complete intellectual grasp. Life pushes you to accept that not everything can be explained, controlled, or predicted. This acceptance does not make you passive, it makes you receptive. When you release the need to understand everything, you become more open to learning what truly matters. Trusting silence also deepens compassion. When you stop filling space with assumptions and judgments, you become more present with others. You listen without rushing to respond. You observe without immediately labeling. Buddhism teaches that deep listening arises from stillness. Life pushes you to develop this quality because it brings clarity, connection, and peace into every interaction. Over time, you begin to notice that silence no longer feels threatening, stillness no longer feels like stagnation, not knowing no longer feels like failure. Instead, these states become familiar and grounding. You understand that life does not reveal everything at once, and that forcing clarity often delays it. Buddhism teaches that patience is not passive waiting, but calm presence. Life pushes you until you embody this patience naturally. Eventually, you realize that many of the answers you were seeking were never meant to arrive as words or concepts. They were meant to be lived. When you stop asking life to explain itself and start experiencing it directly, understanding arises without effort. Life stops pushing so hard because there is no longer resistance to its pace or mystery. In the end, life was guiding you toward a deeper trust, not in specific outcomes, but in the unfolding of existence itself. Silence, stillness, and not knowing were not obstacles on your path. They were the path. When you learn to rest in them without fear, life no longer needs to push you forward. You move naturally, guided by awareness rather than anxiety. This is the quiet wisdom Buddhism points toward, and this is the final maturity that pressure was shaping within you all along. 14. Life pushes you until you stop identifying with your thoughts and discover the observer within. One of the most profound and liberating lessons life teaches through sustained pressure is learning to stop identifying with your thoughts and discovering the quiet observer within you. Much of human suffering exists not because of what happens, but because the mind narrates, judges, predicts, and repeats stories about what happens. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are not reality, Yet most people live as if every thought is a fact. Life pushes you when this identification becomes too heavy, because the mind cannot awaken while it believes it is the thinker rather than the observer. When life becomes overwhelming, the mind often grows louder. Thoughts multiply, fears intensify, and self-judgment becomes constant. You may begin to believe that you are weak, failing, lost, or broken simply because these thoughts keep appearing. Buddhism teaches that these thoughts are conditioned responses shaped by past experiences, fears, and habits, not truths about who you are. Life pushes you by creating situations that reveal how unstable and unreliable these mental narratives can be, forcing you to question whether the voice in your head truly defines you. The pressure life applies often exposes repetitive thought patterns that have been operating quietly for years. You may notice how quickly the mind jumps to worst-case scenarios, replays old mistakes, or compares you to others. Buddhism teaches that this mental activity is not personal. It is simply the mind doing what it has been trained to do. Life pushes you until you become aware of this process, instead of being consumed by it. Awareness is the turning point, because the moment you observe a thought, you are no longer inside it. Discovering the observer within is not an intellectual exercise, it is an experiential shift. You begin to notice that thoughts arise on their own, without permission, and fade away without effort. You see that emotions follow thoughts and dissolve when attention changes. Buddhism teaches that if you can watch a thought, it cannot be who you are. Life pushes you to reach this realization not through theory, but through experience, because understanding born from pressure is deeper and more stable. As identification with thoughts loosens, something subtle changes in your inner world. You no longer react instantly to every mental impulse. There is space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice appears. Buddhism teaches that freedom lives in this space. Life pushes you until this gap becomes visible, because without it, you remain trapped in habitual reactions that create repeated suffering. This lesson also transforms how you relate to fear. Fear is largely a product of imagined futures created by thought. When you identify with fearful thoughts, fear feels overwhelming and real. Buddhism teaches that fear dissolves when observed with awareness rather than believed without question. Life pushes you through situations that trigger fear so you can learn to watch it instead of becoming it. When fear is observed, it loses its authority. It becomes a sensation rather than a command. Letting go of identification with thought does not mean suppressing thinking or becoming passive. It means recognizing thought as a tool rather than a master. Buddhism teaches that the mind is useful for practical matters, but destructive when it dominates awareness. Life pushes you until you learn when to use the mind and when to rest in observation. This balance brings clarity without anxiety and action without inner conflict. As the observer becomes more established, emotional suffering begins to soften. You still experience sadness, disappointment, and uncertainty, but they no longer define your identity. You understand that emotions arise in awareness and pass through awareness, but awareness itself remains unchanged. Buddhism teaches that this unchanging awareness is your true refuge. Life pushes you until you stop searching for stability in thoughts, roles, or circumstances and begin resting in this inner stillness. This realization also reshapes your sense of self. You stop defining yourself by past mistakes, future fears, or present struggles. You see that these are experiences moving through you, not who you are. Life pushes you until this distinction becomes clear, because without it, identity remains fragile and easily shaken by change. Over time, you notice that life feels less threatening. Challenges still arise, but they do not overwhelm you in the same way. Thoughts come and go, but they no longer dictate your emotional state. Buddhism teaches that this is the beginning of liberation, not escape from life, but freedom within life. Life pushed you here so you could discover this freedom directly. In the end, life was not pushing you to make you stronger in the conventional sense. It was guiding you to recognize what was always strong, silent, and steady beneath the noise of thought. When you stop identifying with the mind and rest in the observer, life no longer needs to push you through suffering to get your attention. Awareness has already taken its place. This is the quiet awakening Buddhism points toward, and this is the deep inner freedom that only sustained pressure can reveal. 15. Life pushes you until you finally let the old self die and stop resisting who you are becoming. One of the most painful, misunderstood, and necessary reasons life pushes you so hard is because an old version of you is reaching its natural end, and you are resisting that ending without realizing it. Buddhism teaches that rebirth does not only happen after death, but continuously throughout life. Yet the mind fears endings more than almost anything else. When life begins to apply intense pressure, it is often because an identity you have lived inside for years is no longer aligned with your awareness, but you are still trying to protect it, defend it, and keep it alive. This resistance creates suffering that feels overwhelming, confusing, and deeply personal. The old self is made of habits, beliefs, roles, coping mechanisms, and emotional patterns that once helped you survive. It may be the version of you that sought approval, avoided conflict, tolerated disrespect, chased certainty, feared being alone, or defined worth through achievement or relationships. At one time, this version of you was necessary. Buddhism does not judge the old self as wrong or weak. It understands that every version of the self arises in response to conditions. However, when conditions change and awareness grows, clinging to an outdated identity becomes a source of pain. Life pushes you when it is time for this identity to dissolve, but the mind resists because it equates identity with survival. This resistance often shows up as exhaustion without a clear cause, emotional heaviness that does not lift, loss of motivation for things that once mattered, and a deep sense that something is ending, even if you cannot explain what. You may feel disconnected from your past life, but uncertain about the future. Buddhism teaches that this state is not failure or confusion, but transition. It is the space between who you were and who you are becoming. Life pushes you in this space because transformation cannot be comfortable. The old self does not step aside politely. It must be released. The mind fears this release because the old self is familiar. Even when it caused suffering, it provided predictability. Letting it die feels like stepping into emptiness. Buddhism teaches that this fear arises because the mind mistakes identity for essence. It believes that without the old self, nothing will remain. Life pushes you to discover that this belief is false. When the old self dissolves, awareness remains, presence remains, consciousness remains. What disappears is not you, but the illusion of who you thought you had to be. This process often feels like loss, but it is not loss in the ordinary sense. You are not losing something valuable, you are shedding something heavy. However, because the mind has invested years in building and maintaining this identity, its collapse can feel like grief. Buddhism teaches that grief is not only about losing people or circumstances. It is also about losing identities. Life pushes you to grieve the old self properly, rather than dragging it forward into a future it cannot survive in. As the old self weakens, many external changes occur simultaneously. Relationships shift or end, roles dissolve, environments no longer fit. These changes are not random. They reflect an internal transformation that has already begun. Life rearranges the outer world to match the inner shift. Resistance to these changes intensifies suffering because you are trying to live a new awareness through an old structure. Buddhism teaches that harmony returns only when inner and outer realities align. The death of the old self also brings moments of fear and vulnerability. Without familiar patterns, you may feel exposed, uncertain, or incomplete. The mind searches desperately for something to cling to, whether it is a new identity, belief, or distraction. Life pushes you to stay present in this vulnerability rather than escaping it. Buddhism teaches that true rebirth requires staying with the unknown long enough for clarity to emerge naturally. If you rush to replace the old self too quickly, transformation remains incomplete. As you remain in this space, something subtle begins to shift. You stop trying to prove who you are. You stop defending yourself constantly. You stop needing life to confirm your worth. The new self does not arrive loudly or dramatically. It arrives quietly through steadiness, honesty, and simplicity. Buddhism teaches that the awakened self is not constructed. It is revealed when false identities fall away. Life pushes you until there is nothing left to protect, because only then can authenticity emerge. This new way of being feels lighter but also more responsible. Without old excuses and coping mechanisms, you can no longer blame others, circumstances, or the past for your inner state. Buddhism teaches that this responsibility is not a burden, but freedom. When you stop identifying with the old self, you gain the ability to respond consciously rather than react habitually. Life pushes you to claim this responsibility because it marks the transition from unconscious living to awakened participation in life. The death of the old self also transforms how you relate to suffering. You no longer see pain as proof that something is wrong with you. You recognize it as part of the human experience and a guide toward awareness. Buddhism teaches that suffering loses its power when it is no longer used to define identity. Life pushes you until suffering becomes informative rather than destructive. Over time, you notice that life no longer feels like a constant struggle. Challenges still appear, but they do not threaten your sense of self. You no longer need to hold everything together because there is no fragile identity to protect. You move through life with flexibility, humility, and quiet confidence. Buddhism teaches that this is the natural state of one who has let go of false selves. Life pushed you here not to punish you, but to free you from the weight of becoming someone you were never meant to remain. In the end, life was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to end a version of you that had already served its purpose. The pushing, the pressure, the loss, and the confusion were all part of a necessary ending. When you finally allow the old self to die without resistance, you do not disappear. You emerge clearer, steadier, and more present than ever before. This is not the end of your journey. It is the moment your journey becomes honest. This is why life pushed you so hard, because nothing less than total transformation was required, and nothing less than your full awakening would ever satisfy the truth that was already unfolding within you. If life has been pushing you harder than ever before, it was never because you were weak, broken, or falling behind. It was because you were ready to see something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Every moment of pressure, confusion, loss, and discomfort was guiding you toward awareness, not away from it. Life was not testing you to see if you could survive pain. It was guiding you to see how much pain was created by resistance, attachment, fear, and identity. Through every lesson, life was asking you to release what no longer belonged to you, old identities that had expired, expectations that were never realistic, attachments that quietly drained your energy. The need for certainty in a world that is constantly changing, the hope that something outside you would finally arrive and make everything feel complete. Each time you resisted these lessons, life applied more pressure, not out of cruelty, but out of patience. Awareness grows slowly, and sometimes pressure is the only language the mind listens to. What you have been experiencing is not collapse, but clarification, not loss, but simplification, not punishment, but preparation. Life was guiding you inward, away from distractions and illusions, towards something quieter and more stable than anything you had been chasing. You were being asked to stop running, stop fixing, stop proving, and stop becoming someone for the sake of survival. In that stopping, something essential was revealed: presence, awareness. The part of you that was never damaged by circumstances. When you finally let go of the need to control life, to be saved by it, or to escape discomfort, life stopped feeling like an enemy. You began to see that difficulty was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to strip away what was false so that what remained could finally breathe. The strength you were looking for was not built through resistance, but through surrender to what is. The peace you were waiting for was not waiting in the future. It was already here, beneath the noise of thought and fear. Life pushes until you learn how to stand without leaning, how to feel without running, how to love without clinging, and how to live without demanding ease. Once these lessons are integrated, life no longer needs to shout. The pushing softens, the urgency fades. What remains is a quiet confidence, a grounded awareness, and a deep trust in the unfolding of existence. You move forward, not because everything is certain, but because you are steady. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Freedom is not found in perfect conditions, but in clear seeing. Peace is not created by removing difficulty, but by removing resistance to it. Awakening does not arrive as an achievement, but as a recognition of what was always present beneath struggle. Life pushed you so hard because nothing less than honesty would have freed you, and nothing less than awareness would have satisfied the deeper truth growing within you. If you are still in the middle of pressure, know this with certainty. You are not late. You are not failing. You are not alone. You are standing in the exact place where transformation becomes possible. Let go gently, trust deeply, remain present. Life does not push forever. It pushes until you learn how to walk on your own, aligned, aware, and unafraid.